Already vote.
Yeah. I didn't have the talking stick.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Blockchain Professionals July 2021. I'm Adriana Belotti, and I'm joined this afternoon by a whole bunch of cool people that I really, really love. We have Kriss, McCluskey, Rob Morris, Kaia Myers-Stewart, and Ryan Kriss. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
All right, so we are in lockdown in Sydney. As you know, if you're from Sydney, you know that, and if, I guess if you're from anywhere, you know that it's public information. Anyway, I'm saying this because when we're lockdown in Sydney, the internet connection is usually not good for everybody. So in case we dropped and the live stream goes, just bear with us. We try to get back on as soon as possible, or in any case, we'll continue the conversation and post the video for you guys later. And if you have questions, comments, just pop them in the comments on the live chat and I will relay them to our panelists. All right, who wants to introduce themselves first? Oh, scratch that. Kaia, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first because you're now co-organizer of Blockchain Professionals.
Thank you, Adriana. Yes, indeed. It's a great honor. It's my great honor. Hi, my name's Kaia, and I am a co-organizer of Blockchain Professionals. As of recently, I moved to Sydney from Melbourne, where I was also a co-organizer of some blockchain meetup groups. Beyond that, I'm a head of product at the moment for a company called Bitscore, which is distributed computing. And on top of that, we're building a couple of great products to do with security, starting with a decentralized file storage system and moving on to things like authorization with humans in the loop. And my interest in DAOs is really kind of came from the place where my interest in blockchain came from, which is how do we transact and interact in better ways, not losing all of the great things about our humanity in the digital space. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'm gonna throw the talking stick to Kriss McCluskey.
Hello, I'm Kriss McCluskey. I've been in crypto for a long time. Got really serious about it when Ethereum came around, so 2015, 2016. Since then, I've been investing and researching basically full time. Particularly interested in DAOs. Currently a member of a few DAOs, one being the Lao, which is like a venture-based DAO, Flamingo DAO, which is NFT focused, and Neptune, which is like liquidity providing. And currently building a project on the Algorand blockchain, which I'm happy to talk about later. And we'll throw it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Kriss. Hey everybody, nice to be online with you all today. I'm the COO at a startup called Verida. We're a self-sovereign data startup building solutions for Web3 applications. And very interested in the DAO space. I've sort of been participating in a few DAOs, some sort of actively and a few sort of passively as in the governance process. But yeah, super interested in how DAOs are evolving, particularly of different blockchain networks. So I think that's there's certainly an evolution there. We've seen things happening in the Ethereum space, but also now on other L1 blockchains as well, which I'm sort of getting into as well. So yeah, keen to hear everyone's thoughts on DAOs and how we're seeing the future of economic coordination sort of happen on chain. Oh, I'll pass it to Rob.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey everyone, my name is Rob Morris. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Prismatik. Do a variety of things from angel investing, startup advising, traditional disruptive tech, and blockchain. I've been messing around with Bitcoin since the beginning, and a whole range of other projects. Also interested in DAOs, self-sovereign data privacy, better communities, like all sorts of stuff. Anything that I think will help us as humans to have a better world to live in, be less divisive, cooperate better to solve some of the many problems facing the world. So here we are. I guess, George, you're next.
Thank you. Hi, my name is George Samman. I am an investor and advisor to a variety of projects. which can be found on my website, Sammantics.com. I also, from time to time, have written research reports on a variety of topics in the crypto space. One of the more recent ones I've written is on DAOs, mainly because some of the work that I had been doing at the time was around governance, and I've designed quite a few DAOs. So I wrote a paper around some of the concepts and the different types of DAOs from a technological and a governance perspective. So I'm interested in DAOs. I participate in DAOs. Most projects these days are using DAOs in one form or another. And obviously there's a big shift in, I guess, going from traditional LLCs with blockchain technology into DAO-based corporations. And it seems like that is only picking up momentum.
Excellent.
And back to you, Adriana.
Back to me. Woo. So I'm going to put it back to you because you just mentioned you wrote a paper about DAOs, and just to frame the conversation for, those who haven't had any experience with DAOs yet, let's define what's a DAO. George.
Well, it's actually not easy to do because everyone kind of has their own definitions of what a DAO is and how they want to participate in a DAO and what that exactly means. But I guess like basic principles around a DAO from my perspective is it allows for the participants to have a voice in the governance of what's going on. So team builds out a project builds a DAO that allows for the people who are token holders or other people to come in and participate. What is allowed to be participated on is generally in the beginning decided by the core team. And that could be something as simple as allowing participants to vote on certain issues within the DAO, not all issues. Generally, like what that means is that like in the beginning, despite the fact that it's called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, there is a lot of centralizing factors and it's rolled out slowly to decentralization. So core team needs to build out the product. They need to have some kind of power or autonomy over that, but they want to allow voices and participation from members of the community, and some are more open than others, but generally that core team needs some kind of voting rights. So that usually is in the form of tokens because they will hold probably they won't always hold the majority of tokens, but enough. Them and some other people can sway voting if it's a coin voting system, and that depends on the voting system that's done. But basically, that's what I think it is. It's around like allowing participation from members. And then there's obviously more complexities in that, but I think that's where the base of it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it like, in simple terms, I just think of it as any structure, decentralized structure that allows a community to self-organize in all of its many wonderful flavors. There's so many interesting mechanisms that DAOs are coming up with already.
I think I'd throw in there the ownership word as well, where it's that participation and coordination of work, but also the incentive that those participating are also owning in potential upside as well.
Yeah, I'll add on a little bit. I'll give you my view. It's kind of a aggregate of what you all said, but I view it as just a coordination mechanism, a transparent one. So using the blockchain to transparently see every action that the DAO takes, while scaling to as many people that you want to participating that don't have to know each other and can remain anonymous and have just a targeted goal or like at least some vague goal. So you could have, like George mentioned, a protocol DAO, which would manage the attributes of that protocol. Or you could have like pooled capital in which you would be managing that capital in a very transparent manner, using everybody's brain power together and being able to work through that as like a flat structure rather than a hierarchy, which you would find in like a venture fund or a corporation.
I have a first question / comment from Steve Wilson. He says, so the DAO concept is more nuanced now than the first infamous DAO? Who wants to talk a little bit about the first infamous DAO? Kriss, I think you had some experience with that directly, didn't you?
Yeah, so the first DAO was planned as a pooled capital. So everybody would pool capital and have like a pro rata ownership in how that capital is deployed, and their vote would be pro rata as well. But the DAO never made it to fruition. There was a vulnerability discovered early on that ended up draining the funds, and that's how we ended up with Ethereum Classic. The Ethereum community ended up, it's still contentious. Like, it's still a topic that brings about arguments amongst, you know, the early Ethereum members or community. But it ended up they ended up doing a hard fork, which resulted in two separate chains, one being the ETH chain and the other being the ETC chain. On the ETC chain, there's still the hacker got away on the ETC chain. But that was the plan for the original DAO, is to pool capital and allocate it via voting on chain. And that's kind of where it all started in a meaningful way. I think, if I remember correctly, I think it was $50 million or so worth of Ethereum was lost. Yeah.
More than that.
Was it? Yeah.
I think it was closer to like 150 million.
Yeah, and in today's price, like I have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like $1 billion, maybe.
Could be.
Yeah,
Probably more.
I think it was interesting, right? How it felt like it really set back the DAO movement when that happened for a long time. Like, everyone cooled their feet on it for a few years at a macro scale. But it's really hotted back up again now, and I think it's really important. Like, DAOs are more than an exploration of how we have decentralized governance or how people co-participate in the value creation that they're driving. I've been debating this with Kriss recently, but it's, in human society, one of the big problems we have is we need better and better ways of collaborating together with other humans. The better the tools we get, the larger groups we can productively collaborate in. And what happens is, in larger communities, power starts to accumulate into these sharp little points. And then people who like power for bad reasons tend to pursue those places where power accumulates. And you end up, and then they sharpen the point further. And that's really bad for human societies generally. You also have a problem at scale with communities that the larger they get, the higher the average safety preference goes up, and the higher the average dick ratio goes up. And so the communities just sort of become more toxic and tend towards censorship, or what I sometimes provocatively refer to as totalitarian moderation. And so I think it's a really important subject, DAOs, is like this, this experiment into ways that we can make it harder for power to accumulate in unproductively sharp points, spread things around, lower the barriers for entry. I think that's a really fantastic side effect of a DAO, is that it does substantially reduce the barriers for entry. And so anyone can kind of start to kind of get involved and participate. And then what are the mechanisms that you can use to make it a really productive community? One of the reasons that I'm really interested in this subject is because I think it's actually relevant for humanity and the problems that we're facing in the coming decades. Throw that one out to the group.
I think that's interesting. And just to follow up on something you said, so this is something that I've looked at quite a bit, and it's one of the bigger concerns that I always have around DAOs. And like, generally, like, when you're talking about like blockchain and like, especially with DeFi and stuff now, you're like, well, and even like the NFT space and a lot of it, it's like, we don't want to recreate what's already created. So you want to get rid of middlemen and stuff like that, right? Well, with DAOs, there's a problem with the way that most DAOs vote. And coin voting is basically voting with your wallet. And the problem with that is that a lot of the largest holders don't vote. They just hold the coin because they want to get massive profit off of it. Voter apathy is like tremendously large in almost every single DAO. There's only a few communities out there where like there's actually a lot of participation going on. I mean, the Cosmos is one of them. Tezos at one time was, I don't know the measurements anymore there, but like a lot, even like Aragon's very low, right? Like, the problem is you have to incentivize people who aren't rich and are really active in the community to be a participant in the DAO. So you need to restructure, I think, in ways. It can't just be coin voting. You need to come up with other mechanisms, whether it's through work or whether it's through transactional activity or whether it's through other things that allow for a more equal voting and say in the community, because coin voting is always going to give like the majority holders the biggest weight, and generally like what they think and what they want, it could be very different from the people who are actually using the DAO. They're very out of touch with a lot of the issues within the DAO. They're not voting in DAOs. They're not participating in meaningful ways. So it's something that needs to be thought about as well.
Yeah, I think it's natural, like early on like this, that it's a bunch of the implementations are going to be bad. And I think the voting representative democracy problem is like not a DAO problem. It's like a human problem.
It's a human problem. It's a proof of stake problem as well, which is
yeah. Like the Greeks, had this notion that in order to have adequate representative democracy, everyone had to be able to like steelman, take both sides of an argument, be educated upon all of this stuff and be across it. And it was like seen as like a really important aspect of making democracy work. And we don't live in that world, and we're not going to live in that world where your average participants in communities are going to necessarily be that engaged. And so we absolutely need to come up with better mechanisms to have good governance. And we can segue into all of those subjects, like should you have an executive group who are given a bunch of power to act autonomously? How does it get taken away? Should it be easy to take it away or hard to take it away? And I think where you get to is that you quickly realize that it's a series of trade-offs and there's no one size fits all. And so then I think of it like, how do we develop these ideas and figure out what kind of structures are good for what kind of communities at what kind of scale, and then be able to have this like blockchain and DeFi style like rapid iteration on healthier, more constructive communities. And we obviously have a long way to go.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that a little bit. Like what we do have the advantage of is we can be very flexible with how we experiment with this. We can try different methods and attributes on chain and see how they work out and quickly change them, like you mentioned. And also, like the trade-offs are greatly different for something like a Uniswap, which is managing billions of dollars, and their system is quite key to DeFi, compared to like a small pooled capital from 30 people that just want to execute together. But I think we have the opportunity to build frameworks that will facilitate quickly changing the structure so everybody participating knows what they're getting into, and it'll be clear very quickly what works and what doesn't is what I hope occurs.
And I think just to add to that, like there's going to be, I guess, outcomes which community members sort of don't agree on, but the fact that you're seeing these decisions sort of play out in real time through these more transparent governance systems is a good thing. I mean, Uniswap had some huge blowback with their allocation to the DeFi education fund, which was like some kind of $10 million allocation from their treasury for a lobbying group, and had an approval based on a small amount of voters who had weight through the token holding through their token holdings. And but that was, it played out in real time on Twitter and through their community, irrespective if people disagreed. So I think the fact that that's more transparent is a good thing in the first place. And then even SushiSwap, they had a similar or a different issue with the sale of some of their treasury tokens at a discounted rate to a bunch of VCs. And again, that played out online. Everyone could see what was happening. There was a lot of disagreement. What is the value of doing a discounted sale to a bunch of VCs, whilst all the other smaller token holders miss out. So yeah, there's good and bad there. And I think communities will learn from these debates and governance decisions. So that's quite interesting to see, rather than that sort of being hidden away in boardrooms in the corporate world, which would be is quite a stark difference.
On that note, I'm curious. I have a question to kind of throw out there, just because I'm interested. what is working well, like now that we have the benefit of hindsight, transparency, and these different contextual and nuanced, situations through which we're playing out the great experiment of DAOs. Can anyone throw out maybe some examples of DAOs that are working well, or success factors that are working well for them, and what the context is around that?
I mean, just to return to Ryan's point briefly, that Uniswap fan and troop thing was absolutely fascinating to watch, and it was really interesting to watch these VCs throwing out ideas that were which is a thing that some investors do, is you say, oh, this is not in our interest, we're not doing this deal, and they come back with a deal that addresses the points that you're raising and is even worse for you. And it was really interesting to watch that get blown open by members in the community who explained why those deals are actually worse to everyone in terms that they could understand. I mean, that was a fascinating episode to watch, but I'll yield the floor.
Going back to Kaia's question, and sorry, Kriss, and just adding to that, because there's an interesting point coming from the chat. We are talking a lot about incentives. How about disincentives for coin holders that don't participate? Have we seen any examples of that as well?
So in DAOs, not as much yet. But in proof of stake, there is disincentives like slashing, there's penalties and stuff. I think I haven't seen many DAOs that have built in slashing type of mechanisms to punish people who don't participate in voting. Generally, you don't want to punish people. You want to incentivize, you don't want to disincentivize. So lots of projects are very, very loath to have to imply punishment techniques like slashing, which is a way that you take what people will do with voting and stuff is that you have to, if you want to vote on something, you want to propose something, you have to put up a stake of some kind, so that this helps to get rid of spam and other types of things, so that you get real proposals that are up there that people vote on. And if your proposal gets accepted, you get your money back, and the proposal gets accepted. If it doesn't, maybe in some instances you won't get your money back. It's not like tons of money, but it's enough that you put in and you put a real proposal up, so that you're not just spamming out all sorts of different stuff and noise. Some people actually use they have a committee, like Rob was saying before, where they'll just kind of look at different proposals, and there'll be some people who decide which proposals look good and don't look good. I don't actually like that approach per se, because then it's just kind of people deciding, again, representative democracy, elites deciding what's good and what's not good. I think it should be more community spirited, but then you will get a lot of spam. You'll get bad actors who are trying to ruin the project, who come in and start putting bullshit up and whatever. But I think back to Kaia's question a bit, and it kind of overlaps with disincentives and punishment, but more around what works and what will work more in the future, in my opinion, is one of the things that people question a lot about DAOs is you're getting a governance token. Well, what's the utility of just having a governance token? Well, it allows you to vote in the DAO, it allows you to be a participant of the DAO, but that's all it does. Lots of projects now are starting to look at ways that they could accrete value back into the token, whether it's through revenue sharing, without trying to be a security, which is always a huge issue of you can't directly generally give back out projects, unless you're not projects, coins or dollars or whatever it might be, in a way that looks like a dividend or a distribution, unless you have some kind of regulatory approval or something. Some projects are doing it for a variety of reasons, but generally there's burning mechanisms as well that lower the supply of the token and then allow you to kind of participate in more upside through less supply, and presumably the project's growing and there's more revenue coming in and stuff like that. I think people are getting as a trend, I would say that people are getting a little tired of just a governance token without some kind of economic benefit behind it. And while people are still just buying, a lot of them in general, more nuanced players aren't, because they're saturated and there's still no value accrual. But in a bull market, obviously things go up in price and whatever. But people are starting to look and say, well, not everything is going to 30x all the time forever. Every time there's a bull market, some of this stuff is complete garbage. So economic incentives around the token in a DAO is what people are really looking at, and in general in a lot of projects.
And I think that's where like Sushi Swap is doing it well. Like they're there's a protocol fee on trades that go back to Sushi holders versus Uniswap, which sort of doesn't have that. It's just going to liquidity providers. So I think there's a lot of experimentation with token design that's accompanying. Yeah, how do you create that sort of value accrual to those governance token holders?
Yeah, and personally, as an investor, I like to find projects that are going to give me some kind of economic benefit back, as well as price appreciation, just because in bear markets or when prices aren't moving, you're still getting back some kind of a distribution from the economic benefit of from a growing project. So that's what you want. And that actually aligns everyone more equally in a lot of ways as well, to want to see the project succeed and grow, because everyone is benefiting from it with their wallets.
Yeah, the trouble with incentives is they work, right? And they're complicated to think about. And so, for example, on the subject of disincentives, you touched on it, George, but like good incentives are the best disincentive. But occasionally you want to use a punishment because it's like, what is it, 3 times more emotionally poignant if it's a negative than if it's a positive. And so you see that most often in things like service node infrastructure, where you've got like a decentralized node with custody of something. And so we go, okay, if you're a bad actor, then you're going to lose this huge economic stake. And then that means acting in your own selfish interest, you're not going to want to do that. So that's a useful time to use a punishment, but most of the time an incentive's far more effective. And I think one of the things we're still figuring out here is how to have non-perverse incentives, right? And like, how do these things tend to flow out? And a lot of that just comes from experience. So in like traditional company structures, despite the fact that the vast majority of companies just totally screw it up, we do actually have a pretty good idea of what kinds of incentives produce what kind of results. And there are common patterns. So I'm really interested to see how we come up with better incentive structures. I think community DAOs and community tokens are going to be a really interesting front in that. Like you get these ideas where you can go, okay, let's say we've got this broader community of people who are interested in something. And then typically you might have a bunch of sub-communities that form up in different verticals of that community. So you might have, let's say like a vertical is a theme. So let's say you have like 3 or 4 major themes in a community. And then within that, you've got a bunch of different communities with their own take, their own thing they care about. If you had a structure like that, an example might be playing video games and live streaming it, for example. You might have all of the people that like live streaming Fortnite, all of the people like this different game, etc. So, you might have a mechanism that looks like, here are the people running the platform. Here are the people that are interested in building communities around a particular vertical. Here are the people that are interested in building just an individual community itself. And they all have different incentives. So you then want to design that so that, for example, the middle layer probably wants to be incentivized to acquire communities and for all of the communities to thrive. Each of the individual communities might be semi-competitive. And so if you had a staking mechanism where if you wanted to stay in a community and participate in that community, you had to stake something for the duration, then you might choose to withdraw that stake and put it into this other community that you agree with more. And at the level above that is looking at it going, well, we want to just make sure that all of the communities thrive as much as possible. Then they become a sort of de facto mediator and so on. And so, is that the right structure? Well, that's like a really complicated question. And this is just like a sort of a simple example, but I think we're going to get these really kind of complex interwoven structures that emerge over time with all of these different roles that are incentivized in different ways is basically the protracted point that I'm making here.
Yeah, I think a really good example of a community DAO that I've sort of seen emerge is the Bankless DAO. I'm not sure if anyone subscribes to that newsletter, but basically it's a DeFi newsletter that started a couple of years ago as a Substack You subscribe. Well, there's a free edition, but you can subscribe as well. And probably about 3 months ago, they launched a DAO and airdropped a bunch of tokens to their subscribers based on, how long the subscriber had been subscribed to the mail list. And through that, they've started to really broaden. They've created a bit of ownership really in that community. And then also, getting to Rob's point, they've started to form like sub guilds. I mean, their whole thing is around education, around DeFi. So they've started to form sub communities or guilds that focus on particular areas, whether that's revenue streams for the DAO or content or marketing. And it's quite interesting just to see all this play out on Discord. And that's a very sort of grassroots community that I've seen emerge, and I'm sure we'll see that model or similar models emerge in different verticals as well. So that's the beauty, I think, of this permissionless set of tooling that we have now for communities to sort of just do these things. There's no barriers really if people want to give it a go.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you mentioned the social tokens, and like you mentioned, the bankless DAO, they don't necessarily have to be managing a lot of funds or an important, protocol managing billions of dollars. It can be a social token, which is a way for, an influencer or a celebrity to connect directly with their fans and create a DAO around that. So you essentially have a group of super fans that you can really engage with on a level that was like unimaginable before and coordinate with them, which could lead to just interesting outcomes down the line, and a way for them to monetize their talent in a more direct way as well and raise capital. And, it's just cutting out a lot of people and going direct to the people that want the product, which is like an important aspect of DAOs and shouldn't be kind of left on the sideline. Like that could be the real product market fit we see with DAOs, could be mostly on the social layer and just a way to coordinate that.
I agree with that 100%. And I just find it kind of ironic in a lot of ways that we've come full circle on this, because I remember in like 2016, 2017, people were talking about personal tokens and branded tokens, and it got completely mocked and laughed at, and it went down in the bear market as a complete pile of shit. And with DAO structures, it's been reinvigorated, and now everybody's talking about like community tokens and social tokens and how they are going to reorg and change things. And I absolutely always thought that would be the case, because that's exactly what it's all about, is like community driven types of people who don't need to be in the same geographical location, but have common interests through the internet and digital media and blockchain and DAOs. You can organize globally and in a way where you have interests and you're all working for the same thing, which is in the DAO structure of building out the DAO, growing the community, and making revenue for it. So like that stuff to me like was always so like I always thought that would be a big use case for crypto. And you can even extrapolate it into like the metaverse and gaming as well. So like these things, like absolutely, like the currency of a digitally native world has to be a digitally native currency, and it could be your currency, it could be another currency, it could be everyone's currency. It just depends what holds value to certain people.
One of the biggest projects in Australia right now is Immutable, and they are a gaming platform.
Yeah.
The metaverse is a really interesting trend. I've been fascinated in that for many years, and building some companies in the metaverse, and so on. It's where it all kind of comes together, right? Like NFTs and collectibles and digital scarcity is like a really big and important part of the metaverse. As is the community part. It's actually a great metaphor to understand community DAOs better if you're struggling with it. Is if you imagine you're in the metaverse, which you're an avatar, spatial world where you can move around. And you imagine that there's just like this whole world, and out in the middle of nowhere, there's like some land that there's just nothing around. It's got no value. and you go and you buy that for cents, and then you build a little market stall there where you sell whatever, something. And then it becomes really popular, then the value of the land that you bought for nothing is now going to have appreciated. Maybe you end up with this whole thriving community. It becomes the place in the metaverse world that people come to buy this particular kind of thing. And all of the companies in the world that want to be associated with that want to be there. So you can see how it's an easy to understand metaphor for basically the same thing as what a community DAO is. You know, whether the value appreciations in the value of the community, whether it's in the value of some land, whatever it is. Metaverse is going to be a very, very large theme in the coming years. For example, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg just said that Facebook's going to be a metaverse company within 5 years, right? So it's happening. And so there's a segue into the whole reason why, or one of the whole reasons why I think that DAOs are so important is because, you know, like every technology is a two-edged sword. Blockchain's definitely a two-edged sword. As well. And if you imagine, you know, we currently have the internet, the Web 2 internet as the sort of the de facto way in which we interact digitally. And in the internet, it's reasonably possible to be somewhat anonymous. If you imagine a blockchain-based Web 3 internet where everyone has to be identified to interact with any bit of infrastructure, you could suddenly see how like our digital privacy has been massively eroded. And so is that the future we want to live in? Now's the time that we need to do something about that if we don't want to live in that future. If you imagine that the way that a lot of people get things done is in metaverse-like interfaces, and everything that you do in those interfaces is tracked and your finances are tracked and everything is identified, you know, is that the world that we want to live in? So the metaverse for me is where all of these things like DAOs and community tokens and governance structures kind of meets. It's like the place where I think that the turf war is going to happen.
Ryan, you're going to solve that problem with Verida?
Well, that's a big problem to solve. But no, I think, yeah, look, how we're represented online, you know, that there should be personal choice, right? And I mean, this is kind of a bit of a tangent as well, but, you know, we're heading into a world where regulators want to see more identification of people when interacting with particular services. So there's sort of some head-on clashes sort of coming in that regards. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but there's certainly going to be a place for people to be purely anonymous and conduct their transactions in the way that they want, with who they want. But there'll also be a verified KYC compliant sort of portion of that as well. So I think that's the duality of it that will emerge over time.
And I agree with that. But I think that we have more opportunity than we realize there, right? Because part of the reason why personalized identity is so important to regulators and governments and so on is because of the purported benefits that it has in terms of providing a regulated market and safety and so on. But there are ways that we can develop tools that allow much more data privacy and still allow a lot of those things. And we've got some of those. And the degree to which those are widespread, easy enough to use and functional is the degree to which it reduces the argument for these privacy invading dystopian variations of things, which don't, you know, as we know, they don't always start bad. They start with the best of intentions, but you get this erosion over time where if you've got the data, if you've got the tool, what could it be used for by one of those people I was talking about before that seeks power where they can find it? You know, and so I think for me, it's a call to arms. It's a call to action to say, what world do we want to live in and what can we do about it? You're working on a product that I think is really important, Ryan. It's one of the pieces. Yeah,
totally. And I think, you know, there's a way forward that doesn't look like the path we've trotted, right? And that's where we don't want to go down is that cost of doing identity management and verification with the same traits we're used to, and the cost of doing that is so high versus any purported benefit in stopping nefarious activity. Like there's stats out there that prove all this stuff. So yeah, how do we forge
cost is already too high, right? Like it's way too high.
So there needs to be a new path forged where we can do things and ensure our verification of who we are when we need to, but do that in a private way.
And and sorry to keep jumping back, I'm going to yield after this, but there's a cultural problem element, right? Like a lot of people misunderstand what culture is, but it tends to flow from what you do regularly day to day, whether it's in a company or a society. And so to use Facebook as a metaphor, like back in the dawn of the web, it was a really weird thing to do to blog publicly. Not very many people did it. And when Facebook was first launched, they couldn't have launched anything like the platform they have at the moment. Everyone would have rejected that kind of functionality. And I looked at that and I thought, over time, this is going to become normalized. It's going to see a lot of adoption. What will happen is eventually everyone will have this kind of thing. Eventually, organizations are going to rely upon it. Eventually, you're going to fall outside the cracks if you don't have it, and we're going to end up in this sort of nightmare dystopia. It didn't happen as badly as I thought it would, but more or less that happened, right? You can see that the lobster kind of gets boiled slowly over time. And so one of my big concerns around a bunch of the measures that are being normalized in this world that we live in at the moment around things like COVID and so on. So, we're looking at a lot of data tracking. We're looking at check-in where you go. We're looking at vaccine passports. We're looking at all sorts of stuff that's there for good reasons now, but normalizes people having far less privacy. And so, I think one of the things that we can do is to by providing really good alternatives. It's a slow burn thing. It's like, we're planting a seed, but if we can make those appealing enough, then we can start to shift the culture so that people are more conscious of the ways in which the systems that we're building could be really bad for everyone.
And that's why we need better tools. Like, there needs to be that optionality for developers to use great tooling that can preserve privacy, rather than just with the status quo tech stack. And that will actually reduce their liability as well, if you think about it. So, anyway.
To add to your point there, Ryan, as well, I think we definitely need better tools, and there needs to be a more coordinated effort, I think, for all levels of organizations and different comings together of groups of people to interact with a tool set in a way that is appropriately contextual to the scenario. So one of the reasons I'm interested in security is because I think about the circles of trust that exist in real life and how we can leverage that in a digital space. So contextually speaking, if I'm working in an organization and there are certain people that understand what I am and am not allowed to do in my role, and what capabilities are kind of a red flag, then there are ways to organize around policy engines and smart contracts that execute and let people know and sign off on my behavior when it's out of the norm or when it's high stakes or whatever. And those things are really interesting to me because they bring in everyone and they take everyone talking to each other in a different way across silos, because there's often a lot of onus placed on the wrong people, particularly security teams who are already stretched beyond their capacity and are working on firewalls, when we know for a fact that most ransomware sits inside a network or a system for up to 12 months before a payload's even dropped, and the bad guys are already in. And so I think there's an interesting community conversation to be had about bringing everyone to the table in an accessible way and getting them talking to each other and making the rules together. And that's all very broad and hand wavy, but that's what we should keep talking about in different ways.
Yeah, and it's tools and knowledge. Also knowledge.
Yes.
Sorry, Adri, you go.
Yeah, and sorry, just skilling people up to be more aware, because even if everyone's slightly more aware, we have a cyber army in the context of cybersecurity, which is my passion. Sorry, Adri, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to comment because it's an interesting fact that Shapeshift is going DAO. It's DAO sizing, because I think they provide a service that gives people the chance to swap for coins that provide total anonymity. And so because of that, they are obviously thinking ahead at a time when they might get in trouble with the law, perhaps, and they might where governors try to shut them down. So interesting.
Are you just dropping out a bit there?
Does it mean that they are supporting nefarious activities, or do everybody have the right of privacy, or both?
Everyone has the right to privacy.
Including companies who want people to have their privacy, right?
I mean, like, we know the answer. Just look at human history and say, how many societies are there where there's no privacy? Is that a common thing? Oh, look, there aren't very many of those. Okay, privacy is an important human need. Like, let's not forget that. And then let's extend that into our digital lives instead of like turning those into the equivalent of like, a community where everyone walks around naked and, do whatever they want. Like, I don't think that that's a good pattern for humans. We don't know what to do with that very well. So privacy is so fundamental and important. And it gets used, it gets the whole think of the children or stop the terrorists kind of treatment, right? Which is like the reasons for reducing privacy are usually actually like straw man arguments in most cases. So we don't want to allow that kind of an erosion, because humans can't survive in that kind of an environment, and that's not good for anyone, no matter who we are, which is why I care about it.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the importance of building out these tools around privacy early on, particularly due to the inherent transparency of the technology we're dealing with. Like I would imagine once N% of participants or the population are too exposed, there's likely a point of no return, and it will be very difficult to maintain a personal privacy. So yeah, projects like what Ryan is working on are very important, and this is getting to a point where I'm not comfortable speaking about, but it seems like there's technologies like zero knowledge proofs where you would be able to still verify that you have certain attributes that are required to participate in certain systems without giving any information on the transparent blockchain, or to even that endpoint that needs to receive that information. You can just verify that it's true. And that's why it's important to build these out from the ground up rather than try to backpedal once it's too late. Yeah, that's how.
Yeah, and because the culture snowballs, right? And so the more normal it is to have public blockchains where all of the transactions happen in a queryable way, then the more that becomes the norm, and the harder it is to get people to do things that are different from that. Regulation gets influenced by that, and it's just the Facebook problem again, right? You just end up having an idea that it can be required when it's not necessary, and it's destructive. So, I think it is important to always remember that this is a war on multiple fronts for the decency of experience for the majority of people in the world. That's what it's really about. It's not about making more money. It's not about political ideologies. It's like, these are just basic human rights that we need to fight to preserve. And it's knowledge, it's technology, it's culture. These are some of the main three fronts that this is happening on, and it's important for us to remember that, right? Like the culture thing in particular, it's like a lot of the battle is there. It's not like making the tool, it's getting people to use it. It's getting people to understand why it's important. It's getting people to want that thing and demand it over alternatives that are less good for people as a whole. So we have a lot of work to do as a species on this stuff. And, I think we're going to look back in hundreds of years and be absolutely aghast at a bunch of the stuff we're doing today. Like, how could we have ever put some of the things we put into the hands of private companies into private companies? Like, what were we thinking? How could we ever, think, oh, let's just, why did we make, large scale economic products without considering how humans are going to interact with it, and spending more time getting the incentives right? We're just going to look at a lot of stuff and be like, oh, that seems like it was absolute madness. A lot of work.
And I think that's why the tooling is so important to help this shift to greater decentralization. And to go back to Adri's comment about shapeshift, like I think that's a really cool DAO design pattern, that others could follow, because you've kind of got a few different design patterns here. You've got, they're a centralized organization going towards a DAO, essentially dissolving their legal entity and shifting, their employees no longer get a fortnightly paycheck. They were all given tokens with a 3-year vesting contract. So it's a different way of coordinating work. But then you've got other DAOs which are sort of more bottom up. So I think there's lots of different design patterns that will emerge. But both of those different pathways or patterns, they'll need the infrastructure and tooling to be able to do what they want to do. And that's where, governance protocols and, aggregators for managing voting and all kinds of different views will be needed to manage these kind of organizations in this new sort of DAO paradigm.
There's a question from the audience. Ron asks, what prevents corporation law being applicable to DAOs?
Nothing. It is applicable.
There you go, Ron. Nothing.
I mean, but the basic problem we have at the moment is that there's some work towards this. For example, in Wyoming, there's some work to create a legal standing for DAO-like organizations as an entity. In Australia, I believe that the default interpretation would be that all of the members of the DAO are part of a partnership and have what's called joint and several liability, which means they can each individually be held liable for whatever the DAO does, which is obviously not a useful structure for, given the aspirations of most of those DAOs. There are people like some really good lawyers in the space who are working on trying to advocate for a legal entity status for DAOs. And so given that we live in a world where we don't have legal entity status, then it's coming up with, it's sort of a gray market. Like there's a sort of an arbitrage happening here where people are trying to do things that are, not allowed, but not stray too far into the terrain of things that are going to get them into a lot of trouble without knowing exactly what's going to get them into trouble. And so it's a really tricky dance. And we're seeing some people come up with some pretty interesting ideas around it. I know that Kriss has, looked a lot into some of those things, stuff like what's happening with open law, for example. Short answer is it's sort of, a bit in a gray area.
Yeah, but I would add to that sure, yeah, they're corporations, they have laws and everything, but some of these DAOs have a lot of money, right? So they can do things in the same exact way that corporations today do things and have subcorps and substructures and put their DAO in a certain location that has a different company that runs it, and there is no centralized person who's in charge of the DAO. So you can do things that the rich do today to avoid having a leader of a DAO, to avoid an owner of a DAO. Is that legal? No. Is it illegal? I don't know. Depends, right? There's ways to structure these things that, obviously avoid certain jurisdictions too. Like you just said, why would you have a DAO in Australia if you're a member? As a member, you have liability. That's just stupid. You wouldn't do that. And as the owner of a project, you will put your DAO in a location that is more friendly to whatever you're trying to work on. Obviously this is legal. There's legal stuff around that. And I'm not saying that this is skirting laws or anything like that. It's just using what exists in the real world.
It's what's actually happening.
So, I'd say if you want to clean up how, I just always think it's funny how crypto always gets this bad name for doing certain things. And if you just look at how everything is in traditional world, it's 10x worse than anything that ever happens in crypto. And yet for some reason, people continually think that crypto and blockchain is this miraculous way to skirt around things, when it's actually a transparency machine in general. That really annoys me. I think it's just these are the laws of the world we live in, and use them to your advantage, just like everyone else does.
Yeah, and on that point, I am a member of the LAO, which is a legal entity, and which is also another model which I think is working in the DAO world. Every member has gone through KYC. It is an entity in Wyoming, so we have open law on the back end that basically interacts with the real world. So they'll make the legal documentation, deal with the taxes, everything like that. So the downside to that is not everybody can pass accreditation, and their jurisdictions might be locked out of even being a member in that.
Yep.
But there is so I'm not a lawyer, but there is discussions I've had where there is light at the end of the tunnel. Like you can structure these in a way where if every member has equal footing within the organization, like there's no dominant member, there's no every member has equal access to all information that is relevant to the entire system. The interest within that entity may not be considered a security. So if those kind of attributes are met, there's a possibility that these could be tokenized entities, legal entities, in which anyone can come and go freely and participate without having to go through the accreditation KYC, or the KYC perhaps, but it'll be a lot more open to anyone from any kind of financial background to participate.
Wouldn't you say the LAO, and this is just my interpretation of it, is more of an instrument for United States companies that want to form a DAO structure, more so than like if I'm in like some other jurisdiction, why am I forming a LAO? Because you're really wrapping a Delaware LLC into a DAO to make it legal. So like you only would do that if you have some kind of regulatory restrictions within the United States, or for some reason you want to be incorporated in the United States versus another entity.
If your business model demands like to be on the right side of regulation and you want more certainty there, that might be a reason some organizations would do it.
Yeah. Anyway, I gotta go. Sorry, guys. Great to chat, but I must go and exercise now, and I only have the window right now to do it. So, in lockdown, gotta keep the mind going somehow. Keep the body moving.
All those in favor of allowing George to go, raise your hands.
We have consensus.
Not raising.
All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.
George. There's one more question from the chat that I'd like you guys to have a think of. Tim Lee, hi Tim, asks, is there anything we can learn from the co-op model in design DAOs, where organizations are controlled by members driven by a common goal? I think everything we can learn from co-ops to DAOs, right?
I mean, it's a good metaphor. I mean, a lot of what a DAO is effectively like a cooperative, right? And so we can look at those things. We can look at some organizational theory stuff and try and apply that to DAOs as well. I mean, in the end, they are human structures, which have to have appropriate incentives and appropriate governance. And so we touched on this before, but like, you know, in a project, for example, a product startup, you probably want you know, people in a role that looks something like executives, people who have more information, more knowledge, are closer to things and can make decisions. And you probably want it to be pretty easy to get rid of those people if they're doing a bad job. In a project where you've got very long-term goals, for example, you're dealing with like a community where people live, which I know is close to your heart, Tim, then when you're making decisions around things that affect that community, you want to maybe minimize the degree to which people spend all of their time focused on politics, and so have like executives that are in there for longer, or come up with interesting representation models. I was talking with Kaia the other day about you know, you have these ideas like Web of Trust, which is basically a way of rating other people. And the problem that these have is they fall into like factionalism, you know, go, oh, I don't like this person, so I'm going to give him a -10. It doesn't actually say how trustworthy that person is, it just says how much you like them. So how can you improve on that? Well, one idea is create these reciprocal voting relationships where you say, you know, I might say, Kaia and I always agree on, you know, most of the DAOs that we're in on votes. And so if I don't have the time or attention to vote on something, her and I can link. And if one of us votes, the other person votes the same unless we vote ourselves. And so then you create this equal power dynamic there. And maybe that has different properties to a rating system and allows you to build a sort of a graph of trusted cooperation, like this circle of trust idea. And so like, I don't know if that's actually answering your question, so I'll yield the floor to some other people to throw their ideas in. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too clued in on all the history of co-ops, but from what I do know, right, it's all about, you know, are those co-ops delivering benefits to their members? And I think, you know, you could certainly apply that same look through DAOs through the same lens, right? Like if a DAO isn't going to bring benefits to the community, well, the longevity may be questioned. So I think that's probably a question of time and seeing how some of these organizations play out. And I'm sure people will be doing studies over them as we go.
Yeah, and the way I view it is these are the tools to create any kind of structure, governance structure, coordination structure you can imagine. So you could follow like the exact co-op model, or the beauty behind it is every participant is assured that the rules they see will be effective, and that is who the game board is set, and they see everything. There'll be no surprises likely, you know. So that's the beauty of a DAO system, is you can lay out the rules for all participants, and it can be fluid, and the rules can change, but it requires all participants or a majority to agree on those rule changes, which I think is like the real beautiful part of these systems.
Just have to put your case forward and, you know, make it so interesting that people want to vote on it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and anyone any participant can propose an action within a system which previously they may not have had access to begin with, or they wouldn't have had the opportunity to propose an idea. In this case, you can propose an idea that would be actionable immediately.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, you go.
No, you go. I was just gonna ask a audience question. Go ahead.
I was just gonna archetype some of the themes, right? Like there's themes of power, of orchestration, of value creation and participation in these things. Kriss was touching on transparency and information sharing, which I think is another interesting side effect. Reduction of friction for participation, which you could put under the umbrella of orchestration. So, you know, like, and I think we have a naivety at the moment where we are doing these things that are overly simple and don't necessarily work in the long run. And it's also just like looking at the existing real world structures we have and saying, look, if we can even just improve on those, that's a start. None of it's ever going to be perfect. We know that where there's humans, there's politics and factionalism. But how do we design these things in a way that it incentivizes cooperation and positive sum games, right? How do you reduce the problem where, for example, politicians tend to target the message to the person's preferences rather than actually taking a stance and saying, we're going to do this thing and it's all really transparent and honest and it's going to be consistent. It's like, how do, you know, we can weave around and get you to just vote for us by information arbitrage or kind of being a little bit tricky. And then you end up with these power structures that are really hard to dislodge in two-party systems. And, you know, so we don't really want to recreate that. So the question becomes, how do you incentivize the individual players in the community to cooperate in constructive ways that has stability over time? And we don't know the answers to this.
Yeah, well, on the road to answers, if I might just be able to spruik someone's work, Kelsey Nabin has done some incredible work on this topic. She's a socio-technical researcher, and I think she's associated with the Digital Ethnography Association, and she's a researcher at RMIT. So check out her Medium and her publications, because they certainly start to delve into these questions and start proposing frameworks that I think are really interesting to this conversation.
Yeah, Kelsey's rad.
She is rad also.
All right, we are just over 3 p.m. One last question that I wanted to ask from the chat, which has been very active, lots of cool comments. I suggest you all go read afterwards. Any examples of DAOs in Australia? Was a question from forgot his name. Hold on. Benny. Do you guys know of any DAOs in Australia?
I know of a heap of DAOs that, have, it's geographic boundaries isn't a strength of the crypto industry, right? So like,
Sure.
for example, some of the really key members of ThoughtChain were from Australia that kicked the whole thing off, which is it's heading towards being a DAO. There's heaps of examples of projects that are, have Australian participants that are trying to, either move towards or be a DAO. But generally, these are really global things, right? Because anyone can participate in them, so it's never just one location. I suppose the question is like, what Australian-led projects is it?
Is there any case studies of DAO projects implemented in Australian context? That's the exact question.
Yeah,
I don't,
right.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific Australian projects, but yeah, there's plenty of DAOs which have Australian participants, but they're global by nature, as Rob said.
Yeah, I think the web's global, therefore the DAOs living on the web will tend to be global as well.
Top of my head, I'm trying to think of some. I'm 100% sure there are some, but I might have to go and go and check my notes and jog my memory.
So as a final question for all, what are some of interesting DAOs that you've seen or taken part of that people that are watching can go check it out and begin their learning journey?
I'll jump in. I think I mentioned a few during the course. I've just put the link to the Bankless one. Another DAO ecosystem I might mention is what's happening on the Near blockchain. So they've got Sputnik DAO or Sputnik DAO, depending on your localization. But that's essentially like a vertically integrated stack, essentially. So it's like a governance contract, and anyone can spin up a DAO on the blockchain. You pick a council, you can put proposals, and you can pay out those proposals from the treasury that DAO holds. So quite an interesting sort of ecosystem. They've taken a sort of a vertically integrated approach where they've got both the governance contracts and also the user interface sort of caked in, and then anyone can. It's like a hub of DAOs almost. So yeah, that's an interesting one to look at versus the more sort of very composable, much more mature sort of ecosystem in Ethereum, which has lots of different flavors of from Aragon to Moloch to open law to, and then all the stacks above that. So anyway,
yeah. All right. I know Kriss has a heap of knows a heap about all of these. I'd love to hear his list. I quite like even simple concepts like index co-op. Which is just
they're doing great.
Yeah. Kriss.
Yeah, I think like what Ryan touched on, if you're interested in how they actually work on chain, I would check out Aragon, Moloch, read that documentation. Compound has a fantastic DAO structure, the Compound Lending Protocol. They have like clear documentation on what they've built and how their voting system works. In terms of DAOs, like I think it's worth checking out the Lao and reading through their documents, or the Flamingo. It gives a really clear understanding of the whole process and what happens behind the scenes. Regarding on-chain DAOs, like project DAOs, I would go to snapshot.org and look through all of the different votes and proposals that have occurred on Snapshot. And you can look at each project that uses Snapshot, which is the vast majority of Ethereum. So if there's a project you like, it will likely be on that list, and you can go and look at the proposals that have been done and what has passed, what has failed. It's all the history is there. And yeah, in terms of what like the active ones I've seen on chain that have been interesting, I think Bandcore has interesting on chain voting that's occurred. YFI, Year in Finance, has interesting action. And Badger is pretty cool actually. Badger like airdrop to everybody. Which I think was one of the most successful launches I've seen in terms of like DAO participation, distribution. Yeah, those three I would check out. and just go through Snapshot if you have some time and check out all of those different projects and what they're doing.
Yeah, like Gitcoin's also a pretty interesting one. We touched on Bankless before. Was it you that mentioned to me the other day Stoner Cats, Kriss? I thought that's a fascinating DAO. It's like
Yes, yeah, that I was going to bring that up when we were talking about the social tokens. So, and another example of a super successful launch. So, Stoner Cats raised like I don't know the exact number, like 7 to 8 million in about half an hour, like $1 million of Ether, fully in Ether.
life's hard in crypto.
Yes, yeah, and split to all of the participants, like the writers, directors, everyone that was participating was paid in the ETH, in the Ethereum, and they released 10,420 unique NFTs that are in the same vein as CryptoPunks, if you're familiar with them, where there's different rarities that are generated upon minting them, and these they've committed to creating a DAO around that. So these token holders, there will be 3,000 more distributed at a future date. So there'll be 13,420, and they will represent participation in the DAO, and that could be anything. They'll coordinate something around that, so you'll be able to participate in different attributes that will be in the show, or what different series might occur. So the first series that they raised for is called Stoner Cats, which is put on by Ashton Kutcher, Mila Kunis, Chris Rock, Seth MacFarlane, Jane Fonda, and so this was unique in an interesting way. So they raised capital direct from fans rather than the traditional film industry route. It's my understanding that they were denied funding from like large entities that usually fund entertainment due to the marijuana aspect, but they thought it was a great show and should be made. So they raised directly from the fans. So it's a direct interaction, like cutting out middlemen that would probably extract value, and giving ownership to the early backers that also has like a collector aspect to it with different rarities and things like that. So it creates like a market, and then we'll see where it takes off. Like I think they're being a little quiet on how they structure the DAO, but they've committed to doing one. And I'll be pretty loud in how I'd like to see that play out. And yeah, it's going to be cool to see that kind of first kind of mainstream push of what could be like a large DAO in the future.
It's a great story. I think it's just a cool, great one to follow.
Yeah,
the themes are rad. It's like there's a bit of censorship resistance in there. There's like community getting to shape, participate in the creation that they care about. Like just all of it's there. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, me too. And like, they can do anything from access to just a private Discord with all of the participants making the show. And like, you're aggregating core, like ideally you're aggregating core fans and bringing their brain power into it. Like there could be ideas that just would never have come up in a different format. And it's gonna be great to watch that play out.
It might end up being all about memes.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think they've been clear on is they won't let the community direct the show. They're just going to have them more involved on different aspects of it. But I don't think they'd be infringing on like what line someone will say each scene. I think it'll be more of like a general kind of longer term community ownership is what I'm thinking.
Did we lose Adriana? Oh, she's back.
She's back.
Yeah, so I didn't hear anything that Kriss said there, but that's okay. I'll listen to the replay later. Kaia, you were gonna add your favorite DAOs?
No, they've all been stolen from me. I thought Near was gonna be my ace in the hole, but Ryan called it out first. Those are all great examples.
Yeah, I don't have any favorites. That's the reason why I put this meetup together, so I can pick your brains and go study. So I'm definitely gonna go have a look at some of those, and I'm also interested in some of the DAOs that might be coming up on the Algorand ecosystem, which I've been studying lately. So yay, cool. All right, thanks everybody for being here this afternoon and night for you, Kriss. Thanks for staying up late for us.
Anytime.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody who
Thanks,
joined the
everyone.
live stream. And for all your comments and questions. There are some things that we didn't get to, but I will add some later on to the comments to the video. Thanks everyone. Have a
Thanks
good
so much.
one.
Happy
See ya.
weekend,
Thanks
everyone.
all.
See you.
Thanks.